5 years of fighting, over 220,000 people killed, half of the population either displaced or refugee. There seems to be no end in sight to the war in Syria. The United Nations has set up, back in 2011, what is known as the Independent Commission of Inquiry on Syria. It has already published 11 reports detailing egregious crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, based on thousands of interviews. Our guest today is the chair of the commission, Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro. Thank you very much for being with us. You probably never imagined that you would publish 11 reports. They're more chilling one than the other, of all the war crimes, the crimes against humanity taking place in Syria. Do you see any end in sight for those crimes?
That is, I think that there is an end in sight, because there is a political track that is my colleague, the special envoy of the Secretary General, I would say our accountability track, that is the territory of accountability. What we do is basically to research, to investigate, fact-finding, and to body in the United Nations doing that. I think that it's important to stress that the word, the adjective independent, has a special meaning, saying that we don't take sides. We are not a commissioner on the government of Syria, or on particularly on the rebel groups, or only about the terrorists.
The Syrian government doesn't have the same judgment as you, because they say, you know, you're biased. You're just taking information from people who are outside of Syria because they don't grant you access to Syria.
Yeah, every year I have to discuss this with the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic in Geneva or in New York. I have explained him several times that we don't copy anything. We just publish what we discovered, what we investigated, and we apply the level of reasonable doubt, and every information that is in our reports is corroborated by one or two other sources. Then this is that we do press clipping, and that you copy, or that we are. The last time the very skilled ambassador in New York told us that he had anything against us, but that we are naive, that we are just playing the role of other. Commanded by other powers, what is completely a myth.
You have investigated. Have you seen a big shift in terms of the crimes that have been committed and who is committing them? Because obviously one can imagine that at the beginning the regime was the main culprit. Has it changed? Have these so-called jihadist groups also been committing some of the egregious crimes you describe in those reports?
Exactly. At the beginning, all was started with a severe repression by the government for protests of a few adolescents that were tortured, and some of them killed. But each year you have the other people in the picture. First, you have the foreign fighters. Second, you have the multiplication of armed groups supported by, as we say, influential states in the region. And then, last but not the least, you see the transformation of one of the major groups transformed in the so-called Islamic State, and the franchise of al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra. And then the landscape is enormously complicated. But this was accompanied by the increase of the absence of respect for the rights of the civilian population. Who is paying the brunt of this war are the people of Syria, the civilian population that has not protection. I must say, not a single warring party respects the rules of engagement in this war. This, I think, that is really tragic, barbaric.
As we speak now, who commits the worst crimes in Syria? The regime, the jihadist groups, foreign interventions?
You know, it's not a sort of Oscar or soccer championship.
No, but
because what interests us are the violations of the crimes specifically, each crime. Of course, that the government, the groups associated with the government, the rebel groups, the armed groups, and the two terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State and Jabhat al-Nusra, and some groups associated to Jabhat al-Nusra that some governments consider moderate. But we don't use this adjective. I don't see moderate. So most of the groups are Islamic, but the only difference that some of them are not jihadists in terms of preaching violence as the war as a solution.
What about countries like Russia or the US-led coalition? We've seen a group like Amnesty International recently accuse Russia of deliberately targeting medical personnel or even civilians that were rescuing victims of attacks. And as such, this would be a war crime. Do you share that assessment?
That is, for us, it's extremely difficult to verify the allegation. We have received allegations from both sides about the coalition under the leadership of the United States and the intervention of the Russian Federation. If you go to our last report or the update that I presented in Human Rights Council last 15 February, you see that we mentioned several of those attacks on schools or, for instance, on medical facilities, but we don't have a conclusion about what coalition is responsible for those attacks.
Do you want to have such a conclusion, or is it just a diplomatic
No.
of saying...
At this time, we are not being diplomatic. It's really a difficulty. I don't remember how she reached this conclusion. We have to be very careful. But we have documented, we received the allegations, and we'll continue researching. If our mandate will be renewed, because our mandate will end in a few days.
You're hoping it will be renewed?
There is a threat in the Human Rights Council that they will renew the commission, but it's not something. It's not my business or the business of the commission.
But your hope is not only to be a catalog of war crimes or crimes against humanity; is that this will eventually serve a tribunal. I mean, the problem is that the United Nations Security Council is the body that can refer Syria either to the International Criminal Court or to an ad hoc tribunal like was created for the former Yugoslavia or Rwanda. But for now, there seems to be no consensus on this.
Yes, you are perfect right. I will not repeat that, but I will just bring two aspects of the question. First, that we are cooperating with several judicial authorities in some states. That is, our data bank, our information, is serving to provide, to answer questions provided by confidential investigations.
Is it about regime people or people, jihadist groups? Or?
No, that is, the facts are from everybody.
Okay.
I say, who are asking, the body is asking our judicial authorities in some countries in the world. The other thing, I think that's very important that accountability is a multi-layered and a multi-phased process. For instance, we don't have to wait for the referral to the International Criminal Court or ad hoc tribunal, as you mentioned, to begin practicing initiatives going towards accountability. For instance, the release of prisoners. Let's begin releasing the women and the children. The disappearance that was a problem in every political transition in the world, in Europe, in Western Europe, or in South America.
But you have to bring criminals to justice in front of the tribunal, like was done with former Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic. I mean, the idea, I imagine, for many people would be maybe to see Bashar al-Assad sitting in the dock eventually.
That is the question of Mr. Assad, as the Secretary General said. This question cannot be a hostage to any negotiation. For the time being, this is not being discussed in negotiations.
But what if in those negotiations that you briefly mentioned, there are talks of providing immunity to the rulers of Syria?
Until now, as far as I know, and as far as I am following what is happening in Geneva now, until tomorrow is the last day of this fast way. This is not being discussed.
But would it be acceptable?
No, for the Commission, we cannot accept any amnesty. This is against international law and is against also inter-American international law that I was very much involved in a few years ago. Then, of course, you cannot negotiate amnesty. But this is not on the table. We are not at this moment. We are at the moment of confidence building measures like those that I...
And it's working? Are you hopeful that the political track is more hopeful than it ever was?
I think that the model of my colleague Staffan de Mistura was very flexible in terms of not having delegates, but having people invited by him, not having face-to-face meetings, but what he calls proximity meetings, people in different rooms, but not meeting themselves. And before starting this, Staffan had, 300 people. He had an enormous patience in terms of building this negotiation. Then I will say that in English, I will say that I am cautiously optimistic.
Thank you very much, Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro, for answering our questions. And thank you for watching this edition of The Interview on France 24.